a lot has been made about the adversarial nature of the IT versus business relationship. We showed some examples of adversaries. Does it have to be adversarial, and how do people get beyond that?
No, it really doesn't have to be adversarial, but you're right to bring that point up. There's a huge sort of what I'll call legacy mindset within organizations that has grown up over time, basically because historically until the last 10 or 12 years, IT really pretty much controlled how technology and applications and new things were developed and sort of deployed across your companies. And they did it really in a silo mentality. But what's happened in the last 8 to 10 years is there's been this whole development of consumer-driven collaboration, social networks, tools, and applications which occurred outside the enterprise. So it was outside of not only the control of the businesses and the functional units, but basically outside of the control of IT. And all of you, in one way or another, and your customers were the forcing function of this event. So whether it was Facebook or Yahoo or Twitter or all the tools that you grew up with and the devices, that's where it occurred. And so now what you're confronted with within the enterprise is, okay, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we built this huge enterprise IT structure within the organization, data centers, servers, everything that made it work. Okay, now we have this other source. And now the key is not either or. This is not a competition, it's a collaboration. And the only way your companies are going to be able to deliver what we call technology-driven innovation is to find a way to seamlessly and securely and in a stable way connect your customers, your employees, using multiple devices, multiple tools back to your systems of record. So the vocabulary that Jeffrey introduced about 3 years ago is the old enterprise architecture we refer to as systems of record. They run CRM, ERP, all the things that he was talking about earlier this morning. The new ones we call systems of engagement. And that's something that you control. And so the big challenge is if we wind up in our companies fighting with each other, we're going to lose the ability to engage with customers and employees in the ways they want to be engaged with.
It seems to be a phenomenon right now where IT is trying to lead change through some hands-on lab things. I was at USAA last year. They have this great BI lab. It's actually a geographically separate place at USAA where people can go and use big data to do data discovery work. And we were talking about the JPL hands-on lab.
Technology petting zoo.
Yeah, the technology petting zoo, right. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about why that's important, Peter, when it comes to managing IT's brand within a company.
Yeah, and Mary said it, and James said it very well. There has always been this sort of almost silo-type behavior that has existed within organizations, and it just doesn't exist between IT. It exists across everything, as many of you know. And so that has reinforced the fact that we each are sort of responsible for our own little part of the organization. Well, if we start thinking about what our lives are like in a digitally mediated world, all of you have one of these. We're all packets. And our lives the way we engage with each other, the way we engage with companies is fundamentally changing. You cannot, from my point of view, from my experience and from the work we've been doing in the last 2 years, you cannot have a good customer experience that's digitally mediated unless you bring all the resources of your organization to bear. So you cannot afford to allow the silo mentalities and the adversarial relationships that Jill was talking about earlier. And that's why I think the subject matter and the timing of her book is so critical. So we have to break that down. And we'll talk a little later in the panel. We've developed and we've installed a couple of prototypes of a new collaborative IT model. But the critical part of it is to brand IT as a partner, not an adversary with business. And I think so if you are confronting that in your organization, I don't care whether you're the CEO or you're a manager in the middle of the company. The FedEx thing we did in the last 7 months of last year, the champion for that project was a manager. She was not an officer of the company. and she drove that project. But she was passionate about breaking down those silos, and I think that's something that, and I'm going to be here for the next day and a half, so if those of you out there who have those examples or are struggling, I'd love to hear from you, because as Jeffrey was saying, this is still early, and there are a lot of pragmatists and a lot of conservatives that are trying to keep this from moving too fast, and I just think that there's an awful lot of opportunity out there for the people that want to step up and take advantage of it.
Talk for a minute about that reporting structure, Peter, because traditionally we have seen the CIO report to the CFO as opposed to the CEO. Some companies that's changing very quickly. Other companies are very entrenched in that model.
Yeah, and this is a good gauge for you to look. There's a couple of gauges that you can do to look at your own organization. One, as Jill said, is what is the reporting relationship of your CIO? If, in fact, he or she reports to the CFO, in most cases, what that signals is that organization only sees IT as a cost center support function. And the primary focus is how can we get more by spending less? Now, part of that makes sense because if you look at your corporate IT budget in most of your companies, every single year, 80% of that budget is already pre-allocated to maintaining the systems of record that you have. And you have to do that, okay? But you're not getting any competitive advantage from that. So when FedEx first gave their drivers handheld scanners 10, 12 years ago, that was a huge competitive advantage. Today, it's table stakes. Today, what FedEx has to be able to do is allow any one of you on the day of a receipt of a package, if you thought you were going to be at your office, but you had to go home for whatever reason, you want the ability to change the delivery of the location in real time on the day of transit. So those kinds of changes are the kinds of things that these organizations are struggling with. And that's why I go back to this whole concept of if we're not working together, we're working against each other.
How do CIOs actually balance the need to keep the lights on with moving ahead with innovation?
Right. I think from our perspective, what we're talking about is how do we better align future IT investment priorities with critical business outcomes. I mean, that really is where there are mutual needs, mutual outcomes, mutual desires. And so I think the way that the IT thing really begins to insert the innovation is to say, well, I'll give you an example. If this iPhone has a remote deposit capture capability on it, okay? If I cannot get that capability seamlessly and securely to the system of record, it has no value. So on the one hand, you could say, well, here are the IT people, they're just back there, as Jill said, maintaining the systems of record, keeping the lights on. Yes, you have to do that because the systems of record aren't going away. And as Jeffrey talked about this morning, whether it's Target or other situations, when those events happen, they are very, very devastating for the organization. But at the same time, the other thing is everybody in this room shared the exact same experience sometime over the last couple of days, which was we all stood in line to check in at the hotel, right? And they do it really well here, okay? But hotels like Hyatt and Marriott, they have, led by the IT people, initiatives underway to eliminate lobby check-in completely. Because they recognize for some of their very significant customers who travel a lot, who are, work hard, and when they wind up at the hotel, whether it's 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, the last thing they want to do is stand in line. So Hyatt, I know, is now experimenting, at least in Chicago, is when you come in, they will meet you at the airport, they will check you in at the airport, they will give you your key at the airport, they will take your bags at the airport, and you go off to your meeting, and when you get back, you go right past the lobby and up to your room, or probably to the bar. But in either case, you're not waiting in line. So this is where IT can start to change what I call change the narrative about IT. You're not a constraint. You are a facilitator of innovation. And I think the more examples, I think Mary's concept is telling stories. You've got to start to have engagements. I mean, I don't care if they're brown bag lunches or webcasts or town hall, whatever works in your company, You have to have ongoing conversations between IT and the other users because it's changing so quickly. And a lot of this adversarial relationship is based upon old attitudes and old mindsets.
Peter, you and I have talked about the changing organizational models for IT, and I know I'm writing a lot about this now. We're finding new emerging profiles for IT, and one of the things that I've been seeing is this broker mentality of the CIO actually saying, you know what, I may not need to own everything anymore, but what I can do is connect the business with the right solutions and give them the relationship, right? Are you seeing the same kinds of evolution in organizational structures and roles?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. We're working on a project now with a company, and because of NDAs, and all of you are familiar with those, I can't be as specific as I'd like to be, but I can say that from a model point of view, we're creating that I'll call it a business relationship manager model. And that means that IT has dedicated people within the organization who are facing off with each of their key stakeholders and internal users. And it's a way of starting the conversation differently, because most of what happened when we built enterprise IT, we started with the technology we had and we added to it. In this new world of digitally mediated engagements with customers and supply chain partners and employees, we have to start from the outside. So the way the narrative begins is we say, what are the key moments of customer engagement that define the success of your business or company? Who or what represents your company at that moment of engagement? And how can we together strategically intervene with a systems of engagement that can make that experience more powerful and more enduring? And when you start the conversation that way, it's a totally different outcome, because it's not about whether this project should get priority over that project, or here we are on the roadmap and how do we move things faster and juggle things around. All those are relevant, but if you're starting from the fact that if we don't figure out how to make this work the way we want it to work, then all of us really don't have any purpose.
In that theme of shadow IT, there's also the investment model at a company that naturally has to change if the ownership model is changing. Peter, what are you seeing in terms of new emerging investment models?
As James said, we're getting distributed spending. And in one way, from an accountability point of view and a commitment point of view, it's good. But there's some other issues. If it's not supervised, if the CIO is not casting the shadow, you can get enormous cost duplication, you can get enormous complexity, and you get real governance issues. Because we all know that I don't care who bought it, when it breaks, they're not calling the head of HR to fix it, okay? Let's be clear about that. So one of the things I'm toying with, and I haven't deployed it yet, but and James, the way he described it, I have this vision for what I call an IT concierge services model. And the point is, IT doesn't build it and necessarily own it and fund it all. But if you're a business within an organization and you have something new you want to do, the first call goes to the CIO to say, let's have a discussion. And what's the best, from a total cost of ownership point of view, what's the best approach? Should we build it because it really does have to be stable and secure and we want to control access to it and use of it? Or can we outsource it to somebody else and have them do it? Okay? But that conversation, I think, is one that is not being held now, because a lot of IT people say, it's mine, I'm going to control it. Well, then the business first, I've got it, it's mine, well, it doesn't work if they don't work together. Systems of record and systems of engagement have to work together, period. So part of that funding conversation is, it's great to have increased budgets, but if you go out and spend it with a silo mentality, you've isolated that capability. And therefore, across the enterprise, you don't get the same impact that you can if you integrate it across the enterprise. One of the ways that we sort of track the progress of disruptive innovations is to watch what sort of early adopters, Jeffrey refers to early adopters or early market visionaries. And I was struck by the fact at the end of January, and some of you may have read this, but Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks, announced at the end of January that he was transferring all of his reporting relationships for all of the company, all the business units, all the key support functions to his president, so he could spend 100% of his time on what he calls all things digital. Now, that says to me that as one of the major consumer brands on the planet, he recognizes that they have to figure out these new ways of engaging. And to me, I don't know how you do that without IT at the table, whether at their table, but the influence that James talked about, that voice that Mary talks about, the fact that her CIO reports directly to her and is a partner with her and is engaged in those conversations and can contribute new ideas, can push back when appropriate on discussions, et cetera. That is the new dynamic. And I think that when we see someone like a Howard, and I don't know what your feeling is about Starbucks or not, but I mean, that is a significant, he didn't put a task force together. He didn't say, let's do a project. He's all in because he believes it's that important. And if someone like that feels that IT and understanding this new world of digital engagements is critical, then I think that speaks volumes to why it's important for IT to be a full participant in all these discussions going forward.